Okay, so remember in chapter 12, the doctor has told Herr Scheisman that Heidi has to go home if she's going to stay well. And so here we are in chapter 13, a summer evening on the mountain. And it will take us 2 sessions to get through this chapter because it's long. Herr Seesman, a good deal irritated and excited, went quickly upstairs and along the passage to Fräulein Rottenmeier's room, and there gave such an unusually loud knock at the door that the lady awoke from sleep with a cry of alarm. She heard the master of the house calling to her from the other side of the door. "Please make haste and come down to me in the dining room. We must make ready for a journey at once." Fräulein Rottenmeier looked at her clock. It was 4:30. She had never got up so early before in her life. What could have happened? What could have happened? What with her curiosity and excitement, she took hold of everything the wrong way, and it was a case with her of more haste, less speed, for she kept on searching everywhere for garments which she had already put on. Meanwhile, Herr Seesman had gone on farther and rung the bells in turn, which communicated with the several servants' rooms, causing frightened figures to leap out of bed, convinced that the ghost had attacked the master and that he was calling for help. One by one, they made their appearance in the dining room, each with a more terrified face than the last, and were astonished to see their master walking up and down, looking well and cheerful, and with no appearance of having had an encounter with a ghost. John was sent off without delay to get the horses and carriage ready. Tinette was ordered to wake Heidi and get her dressed for a journey. Sebastian was hurried off to the house where Diet was in service to bring the latter round. Then Fräulein Rottenmeier, having at last accomplished her toilet, came down with everything well adjusted about her except her cap, which was put on backwards. Herr Seesman put down her flurried appearance to the early awakening he had caused her, and began without delay to give her directions. She was to get out a trunk at once and pack up all the things belonging to the Swiss child, for so he usually spoke of Heidi, being unaccustomed to her name, and a good part of Clara's clothes as well, so that the child might take home proper apparel. But everything was to be done immediately, as there was no time for consideration. Fräulein Rottenmeier stood as if rooted to the spot and stared in astonishment at Herr Seesman. She had quite expected a long and private account of some terrible, ghostly experience of his during the night, which she would have enjoyed hearing about in the broad daylight. Instead of this, there were these prosaic and troublesome directions, which were so unexpected that she took some time to get over her surprise and disappointment, and continued standing, awaiting further explanation. But Herr Seesman had no thought or time for explanations and left her standing there while he went to speak to Clara. As he anticipated, the unusual commotion in the house had disturbed her, and she was lying and listening and wondering what had happened. So he sat down and told her everything that had occurred during the past night, and explained that the doctor had given his verdict and pronounced Heidi to be in a very highly strung state, so that her nightly wanderings might gradually lead her farther and farther, perhaps even onto the roof, which of course would be very dangerous for her. And so they had decided to send her home at once, as he did not like to take the responsibility of her remaining, and Clara would see for herself that it was the only thing to do. Clara was very much distressed and at first made all kinds of suggestions for keeping Heidi with her. But her father was firm and promised her, if she would be reasonable and make no further fuss, that he would take her to Switzerland next summer. So Clara gave in to the inevitable, only stipulating that the box might be brought into her room to be packed, so that she might add whatever she liked. And her father was only too pleased to let her provide a nice outfit for the child. Meanwhile, Diet had arrived and was awaiting in the hall, wondering what extraordinary event had come to pass for her to be sent for at such an unusual hour. Herr Seesman informed her of the state Heidi was in, and that he wished her that very day to take her home. Diet was greatly disappointed, for she had not expected such a piece of news. She remembered Uncle's last words, that he never wished to set eyes on her again, and it seemed to her that to take back the child to him, after having left it with him once and then taken it away again, was not a safe or wise thing for her to do. So she excused herself to Herr Seesman with her usual flow of words. Today and tomorrow it would be quite impossible for her to take the journey, and there was so much to do that she doubted if she could get off any of the following days. Herr Seesman understood that she was unwilling to go at all, and so dismissed her. Then he sent for Sebastian and told him to make ready to start. He was to travel with the child as far as Basel that day, and the next day take her home. He would give him a letter to carry to her grandfather, which would explain everything, and he himself could come back by return. But there is one thing in particular which I wish you to look after, said Herr Seesman in conclusion, and be sure you attend to what I say. I know the people of this hotel in Basel, the name of which I give you on this card. They will see to providing rooms for the child and you. When there, go at once into the child's room and see that the windows are all firmly fastened so that they cannot be easily opened. After the child is in bed, lock the door of her room on the outside, for the child walks in her sleep and might run into danger in a strange house if she went wandering downstairs and tried to open the front door. So you understand? Oh, then that was it? Exclaimed Sebastian, for now a light was thrown onto the ghostly visitations. Yes, that was it. And you are a coward, and you may tell John he is the same, and the whole household, a pack of idiots. And with this, Herr Seesman went off to his study to write a letter to Uncle. Sebastian remained standing, feeling rather foolish. If only I had not let that fool of a John drag me back into the room and had gone after the little white figure, which I should do certainly if I saw it now, he kept on saying to himself. But just now every corner of the room was clearly visible in the daylight. If only I had done that. Meanwhile, Heidi was standing expectantly dressed in her Sunday frock, waiting to see what would happen next. For Tinette had only woke her up with a shake and put on her clothes without a word of explanation. The little uneducated child was far too much beneath her for Tinette to speak to. Herr Seesman went back to the dining room with the letter. Breakfast was now ready, and he asked, "Where is the child?" Heidi was fetched, and as she walked up to him to say good morning, he looked inquiringly into her face and said, "Well, what do you say to this, little one?" Heidi looked at him in perplexity. "Why, you don't know anything about it, I see," laughed Herr Seesman. "You are going home today, going at once." "Home?" murmured Heidi in a low voice, turning pale. She was so overcome that for a moment or two she could hardly breathe. Don't you want to hear more about it?" Oh, yes, yes, exclaimed Heidi, for her face now rosy with delight. "All right then, Herr Seesman," as he sat down and made her a sign to do the same. "But now, make a good breakfast, and then off you go to the carriage." But Heidi could not swallow a morsel, though she tried to do what she was told. She was in such a state of excitement that she hardly knew if she was awake or dreaming, or if she would again open her eyes to find herself in her nightgown at the front door. "Tell Sebastian to take plenty of provisions with him," Herr Seesman called out to Fräulein Rottenmeier, who just then came into the room. "The child can't eat anything now, which is quite natural. Now run up to Clara and stay with her till the carriage comes round," he added kindly, turning to Heidi. Heidi had been longing for this and ran quickly upstairs. An immense trunk was standing open in the middle of the room. "Come along, Heidi," cried Clara as she entered. "See all the things I have put in it for you. Aren't you pleased?" And she ran over a list of things, dresses and aprons and handkerchiefs and all kinds of working materials. "And look here," she added as she triumphantly held up a basket. Heidi peeped in and jumped for joy, for inside it were 12 beautiful round white rolls, all for grandmother. In their delight, the children forgot that the time had come for them to separate. And when someone called out, "The carriage is here," there was no time for grieving. Heidi ran to her room to fetch her darling book. She knew no one could have packed that, as it lay under her pillow, for Heidi had kept it by her night and day. This was put in the basket with the rolls. Then she opened her wardrobe to look for another treasure, which perhaps no one would have thought of packing. And she was right. The old red shawl had been left behind, Fräulein Rottenmeier not considering it worth putting in with her other things. Heidi wrapped it round something else, which she laid on top of the basket, so that the red package was quite conspicuous. Then she put on her pretty hat and left the room. The children could not spend much time over their farewells, for Herr Scheisman was waiting to put Heidi in the carriage. Fräulein Rottenmeier was waiting at the top of the stairs to say goodbye to her. When she caught sight of the strange little red bundle, she took it out of the basket and threw it on the ground. "No, no, Adelaide," she exclaimed. "You cannot leave the house with that thing. What can you possibly want with it?" And then she said goodbye to the child. Heidi did not dare take up her little bundle, but she gave the master of the house an imploring look, as if her greatest treasure had been taken from her. "No, no," said Herr Scheisman with a decided voice. "The child shall take home with her whatever she likes. Kittens and tortoises if it pleases her. We need not put ourselves out about that, Fräulein Rottenmeier." Heidi quickly picked up her bundle with a look of joy and gratitude. As she stood by the carriage door, Herr Scheisman gave her his hand and said he hoped she would remember him and Clara. He wished her a happy journey, and Heidi thanked him for all his kindness, and added, "And please say goodbye to the doctor for me, and give him many, many thanks." For she had not forgotten that he had said to her the night before, "It will be all right tomorrow," and she rightly divined that he had helped to make it so for her. Heidi was now lifted into the carriage, and then the basket and the provisions were put in, and finally Sebastian took his place. Then Herr Scheisman called out once more, "A pleasant journey to you," and the carriage rolled away. Heidi was soon sitting in the railway carriage, holding her basket tightly on her lap. She would not let it out of her hands for a moment, for it contained the delicious rolls for grandmother. So she must keep it carefully, and even peep inside it from time to time to enjoy the sight of them. For many hours she sat as still as a mouse. Only now was she beginning to realize that she was going home, to the grandfather, the mountain, the grandmother, and Peter, and pictures of all she was going to see again rose one by one before her eyes. She thought of how everything would look at home. But this brought other thoughts to her mind, and all of a sudden she said anxiously, "Sebastian, are you sure that grandmother on the mountain is not dead?" "No, no," said Sebastian, wishing to soothe her. "We will hope not. She is sure to be alive still." Then Heidi fell back on her own thoughts again. Now and then she looked inside the basket, for the thing she looked forward to most was laying all the rolls out on grandmother's table. After a long silence, she spoke again. "If only we could know for certain that grandmother is alive." "Yes, yes," said Sebastian, half asleep. "She is sure to be alive. There is no reason why she should be dead." After a while, sleep fell on Heidi too, and after her disturbed night and early rising, she slept so soundly that she did not wake till Sebastian shook her by the arm and called to her, "Wake up, wake up! We shall have to get off directly. We are just in Basel." There was a further railway journey of many hours the next day. Heidi again sat with her basket on her knee, for she would not have given it up to Sebastian on any consideration. Today she never even opened her mouth, for her excitement, which increased with every mile of the journey, kept her speechless. All of a sudden, before Heidi expected it, a voice called out, "Mayenfeld!" She and Sebastian both jumped up, the latter also taken by surprise. In another minute, they were both standing on the platform with Heidi's trunk, and the train was steaming away down the valley. Sebastian looked after it regretfully, for he preferred the easier mode of traveling to a wearisome climb on foot, especially as there was danger, no doubt, as well as fatigue in a country like this, where, according to Sebastian's idea, everything and everybody were half savage. He therefore looked cautiously to either side to see who was a likely person to ask the safest way to Dorfli. Just outside the station, he saw a shabby-looking little cart and horse, which a broad-shouldered man was loading with heavy sacks that had been brought by the train. So he went up to him and asked which was the safest way to get to Dorfli. "All the roads about here are safe," was the curt reply. So Sebastian altered his question and asked which was the best way to avoid falling over the precipice, and also how a box could be conveyed to Dorfli. The man looked at the box, weighing it with his eye, and then volunteered, if it was not too heavy, to take it on his cart as he was driving to Dorfley. After some little interchange of words, it was finally agreed that the man should take both the child and the box to Dorfley, and there find someone who could be sent on with Heidi up the mountain. I can go myself. I know the way well from Dorfley, put in Heidi, who had been listening attentively to the conversation. Sebastian was greatly relieved at not having to do any mountain climbing. He drew Heidi aside and gave her a thick rolled parcel and a letter for her grandfather. The parcel, he told her, was a present from Herr Seesman, and she must put it at the bottom of her basket under the rolls and be very careful not to lose it, as Herr Seesman would be very vexed if she did, and never be the same to her again. So little miss was to think well of what he said. I shall be sure not to lose it, said Heidi confidently, and she at once put the roll and the letter at the bottom of her basket. The trunk, meanwhile, had been hoisted into the cart, and now Sebastian lifted Heidi and her basket onto the high seat and shook hands with her. He then made signs to her to keep her eye on the basket, for the driver was standing near Sebastian, and he thought it better to be careful, especially as he knew that he ought himself to have seen the child safely to her journey's end. The driver now swung himself up beside Heidi, and the cart rolled away in the direction of the mountains, while Sebastian, glad of having no tiring and dangerous journey on foot before him, sat down in the station and awaited the return train. Now, Sebastian should have taken her all the way, right? But he did not. So we will finish this chapter tomorrow, and I'll see you then.